Here's a question nobody in this show has actually been asking. For 4 seasons, every character in From has tried to answer the same thing. Where is this place? They've driven in straight lines for hours. They've climbed towers looking for a signal. One woman got out entirely, actually left, and the town reached across an impossible distance and dragged her back. And here's the part that should bother you more than it does. None of that has worked. Not once. Not partially. That's not bad luck. That's a design choice. A location this hard to map isn't a mystery you haven't solved yet. It's a mystery built so that solving it never mattered in the first place. And once you accept that, the real question stops being where. It becomes, what is this place actually built to do? That's what we're breaking down today. Not the geography, the machine underneath it. Let's lay out the evidence, because this show hides its logic in plain sight. There's electricity with no power lines feeding it. There's livestock thriving in a settlement that's supposedly cut off from the entire outside world. Whether that shifts like someone's flipping a switch. And then there's the detail most casual viewers skip past, the faraway tree. Space folds around it. Not randomly. The same way, every single time, moving people according to rules the town has never once explained. Every impossible thing in this show follows the same pattern. It breaks the normal rules of reality, but it obeys its own internal rules with total consistency. The creatures can't cross a threshold while a talisman is active. Visions show up for specific people at specific moments. Even death comes with fine print here. Consistency like that isn't the fingerprint of chaos. It's the fingerprint of engineering. So stop picturing the town as a location on a map you haven't found. Start picturing it as a machine that's been running for a very long time, doing a very specific job. And once you frame it that way, the question isn't, where is this place? It's, what is this place trying to protect? We actually know how this started, and it's uglier than most horror premises bother to be. Long before the town looked like it does now, the original residents made a trade. Not a curse that fell on them, a transaction they walked into. They gave up their children in exchange for never having to die. And the immortality they bought is exactly what's been stalking the streets after dark for 4 seasons straight. The monsters were never an invading species. They're the people who signed the deal. That single fact rewires everything about how these creatures present themselves. A grandmother, a milkman, a young woman in a dress. It's tempting to read those as disguises, camouflage to get close enough to kill. But if these are the original townsfolk, the clothing isn't a costume. It's a residue. A milkman still looks like a milkman because that's who he was the moment the deal closed, and identity is one of the only things that survived the trade. What didn't survive is everything underneath it. They remember what happiness felt like. They just can't access it anymore. That's also why their violence reads differently than a normal predator's. They walk instead of chase. They wait outside windows for hours. A hunting animal moves with urgency. Something bound to a system doesn't need urgency. It's not hunting, it's performing a function, and functions don't need to hurry. That here's the problem this theory has to solve, and it's the one the show has circled since episode 1. If the trade already happened generations ago, if the immortality's already been paid for, why does the town keep pulling fresh strangers off the highway? A transaction that already closed doesn't need new signatures. Unless it was never a one-time purchase. Unless it's a subscription that has to keep renewing. And that's exactly where the children come in, the ones chanting that one word since the earliest episodes. For a long stretch, that word stayed untranslated, which is a clever trick on the show's part, because an unexplained ritual is scarier than almost any answer could be. But once it finally got translated, the answer turned out to be worse than the mystery. The word means remember. Reframe every scene where those kids circle a character with that in mind. They were never marking a target. They were making a plea. The single creepiest recurring image in this entire series, silent children chanting a word nobody understood, was actually the most desperate act of honesty in the whole town. The children are the one part of this system still trying to tell the truth, and a machine that erases everything else left them exactly one word to do it with. That here's the detail that matters more than the translation itself. How it got unlocked. Nobody cracked that word through research. Nobody solved it by listening harder or cross-referencing folklore. The only thing that ever worked was two specific people recovering something they had personally lived through. The meaning wasn't studied. It was remembered. And notice who the children are actually addressing. Not the town in general. Not themselves. They're pointing directly at two individuals, demanding that they access something buried in their own past. Which tells you what's actually protecting this cycle. It was never really the monsters standing guard. The monsters are the enforcement arm. The actual lock on this prison is amnesia. As long as the people capable of ending it don't remember they've already been here, the system holds that so the two people that word is aimed at have lived in this town before. Not symbolically, literally as different people, generations back, and lost. The tune one of them can't stop humming turns out to be the exact lullaby their past self sang to those same children. Play it, and the memory floods back, and with it comes the meaning of the word, because their earlier selves were the ones who understood it to begin with. That's the show's actual reveal underneath the surface mystery. These aren't new characters solving a fresh puzzle. They're the same souls, running the same rescue attempt a second time, and the first time, it failed. Once that clicks, one of the show's strangest habits makes total sense. Every group that gets pulled off that road arrives carrying the same set of roles. There's always someone who remembers, even in fragments. Someone who decodes the horror into something like a system. Someone who protects. Someone who can reach the children when no one else can. And reliably, someone who breaks, and someone who trades the group's safety for their own. The names rotate. The faces rotate. The functions never do. And there's a version of this idea that gets nervous right here. It'll accept the repeating roles but flinch at calling it reincarnation, because that's the bigger claim. But the show already made that claim for us. This isn't positions being refilled. It's the same soul being handed the same page, over and over. Which lines up with something this show has been quietly running on since season 1. Nothing here gets destroyed, it gets converted. A memory converts into a vision. A death puts a new arrival on the road. A killed creature comes back changed. Reincarnation isn't a new rule being introduced late. It's the same conservation law, just applied to a soul instead of an object. Now let's ground this in what actually happened on screen, because the 4th season did something the show rarely does. It let us watch the conversion process in real time instead of inferring it after the fact. One character's arc this season put the entire theory under a microscope. Her pregnancy was never framed as ordinary, and by the finale, it's clear the thing growing inside her was tied directly to the town's returning cycle of monsters, meaning she was standing on both sides of the town's central wall at once. Resident, origin point, prisoner and source, in the same body. Her transformation wasn't spontaneous either. It was accelerated deliberately, through a corrupted mixture fed to her by another character working for the town's chief antagonist. By the finale, her body is failing in ways medicine can't track, and right before she loses herself completely, her last act as a person is to ask to be remembered. The exact word the children have been chanting since season 2, now spoken by an adult who understands precisely what it costs to be forgotten here. If any piece of who she was survives that conversion, the plea specifically, then the machine that manufactures these monsters has a flaw in it. And a system that's been running without error for generations doesn't survive discovering its first crack. It just doesn't know yet that it's cracking. That's not theory, by the way. That's what the actual season 4 finale, titled If a Tree Falls in the Forest, put on screen. The same episode where the town's protective talismans get physically ripped up and hurled into the faraway tree, stripping every resident of their only reliable defense, right as an earthquake hits and one of those talismans fails mid-quake. Arguably the clearest on-screen confirmation, yet that the stones actually work, who's actually running this. The obvious candidate is the man in yellow, and the obvious read is villain, the hand behind the whole prison. Worth taking seriously, then complicating, he's not new to the story. He was the voice warning characters over the radio as far back as season 1, which means he's been watching and calculating from the very start. He spent this season disguised as a specific resident after killing the man he was posing as her father, and he's been running an unwitting asset inside the town's own community the entire time. Whatever else is true about him, deception is his primary tool. That alone kills the fan theory that paints him as an honest warden, who simply presents hard choices and lets people damn themselves. An honest warden doesn't spend a season wearing a dead woman's face. But look at when he actually escalates. Not when a monster gets killed. Not the moment someone briefly escapes. He moves hardest exactly when the system itself starts to destabilize, when the protective structure comes down and the rules the town runs on start failing. Collecting every talisman and dumping them into the tree isn't cruelty for its own sake. It reads more like maintenance, a repair to something that started leaking, which raises an uncomfortable possibility the finale doesn't confirm but strongly gestures at. If the faraway tree moves objects by folding space, there's a real chance those same stones come out the other side of that fold in the past, meaning the defense residents have relied on for years was placed there by the very act of stripping it away now. A closed loop, feeding its own beginning. That's speculation, not canon, but it's exactly the shape this show keeps turning out to have. Here's a piece of trivia that actually backs this reading up. In interviews after the finale, the show's own creative team has talked about deliberately avoiding traditional establishing shots and center frame compositions throughout the series, always leaving negative space in the frame so the audience subconsciously wonders what's about to fill it. That's not just a style choice. It's the show visually rehearsing its own theme. Something is always about to arrive, and you were never supposed to see it coming from the map. You were supposed to feel it coming from the edges. So here's the mechanism. As clean as it gets. The machine doesn't run on death. Death is just a byproduct. What it actually runs on is repetition, the same story, told again until it lands on the same decision. Fear is the tool that gets people there. A frightened group fractures. A fractured, cornered group eventually reaches for the oldest logic available. That it's acceptable to sacrifice a few to save the rest. That's not a new idea introduced late in the show. That's the exact reasoning that created the town in the first place. The founders looked at their own mortality, decided the children were an acceptable cost, and signed the deal. The horror isn't that a curse happened once. It's that the system is built to walk every new generation back to that same decision and demand they make it again. Every renewal happens the moment someone agrees the sacrifice is worth it. That's the subscription. That's why the bus never stops arriving. MGM Plus has already confirmed from his ending with its fifth and final season, greenlit back in April of 2026 ahead of this season's premiere, with production set to begin later this year. Which means whatever this season set up has to pay off on a tighter runway than the show's ever worked with before. And the pieces are, for the first time, actually finding each other instead of staying isolated. Memory, decoding, the connection to the children, and flat refusal to accept the terms, all in the same room comparing notes instead of scattered and easy to pick off one at a time. If this theory holds, the ending was never going to be a fight scene. The prison doesn't collapse because someone kills its guardian. It collapses because the one decision the system was built to extract finally gets refused outright. Someone stands exactly where the founders once stood, gets offered the identical trade, and simply won't take it. The way out of this town was never going to be a location on a map nobody's found yet. It's a bargain someone finally has to refuse to renew. If you've got your own read on how Season 5 closes this out, drop it below. I want to see what I'm missing. And if this kind of breakdown is your thing, subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming before that final season airs.